Every Christmas, my parents promised, next year will be different. I believed them every single time. While my brother and sister opened expensive gifts beneath the glowing tree, my place at the table was quietly forgotten. Some years they claimed they ran out of money. Other years they said there simply wasn't enough room. I kept smiling, pretending it didn't hurt. Then, on one unforgettable Christmas Eve, they celebrated without even telling me where they were. That night, I made myself one silent promise. I would never spend another Christmas waiting to be chosen. 8 years later, I bought the biggest house in town and suddenly they remembered I existed. My name is Claire, I'm 36 years old, and for most of my life, Christmas taught me what it felt like to be invisible. People imagine childhood memories filled with sparkling lights, laughter, and wrapped presents. Mine were different. Every December, I convinced myself that this year would finally be the one when my parents remembered I mattered as much as my younger brother, Ethan, and my sister, Lily. Every December, I was wrong. There was always a reason. Ethan needed a new gaming console because his grades had improved. Lily deserved an expensive vacation because she'd worked so hard. If I asked why my gift was missing, Mom would smile awkwardly and say, "Honey, you're the responsible one. You understand." Dad always added, "We'll make it up to you next year." Next year never came. As I grew older, I stopped asking for presents. Instead, I became the daughter who solved problems. I paid for groceries when Dad's hours were cut. I covered Lily's textbooks during college. I even helped Ethan repair his car after he'd crashed it. I told myself families weren't supposed to keep score. Still, every Christmas, I hoped for something money couldn't buy. A phone call, a hug, a seat at the table that wasn't treated like an afterthought. When I turned 30, I baked my mother's favorite pecan pie, wrapped thoughtful gifts for everyone, and waited all day for the invitation she'd promised to send. Morning passed, then afternoon. By evening, my phone was still silent. Around 7 o'clock, I opened social media without thinking. The first picture stopped me cold. My parents stood beside a glowing Christmas tree, smiling with Ethan and Lily. The dining table overflowed with food. Wrapped presents covered the floor. The caption read, "Nothing beats celebrating Christmas with the whole family." The whole family, except me. I stared at the screen until the tears blurred every face. For the first time, I didn't call to ask what happened. I didn't make excuses for them. I simply turned off my phone, placed the untouched gifts back into their boxes, and carried them to the closet. Standing alone beside my own tiny Christmas tree, I whispered a promise I had never been brave enough to make before. "I'll stop waiting for people who keep forgetting me." That single sentence changed the direction of my life. Over the next few years, I buried myself in work, built a business from nothing, and slowly stopped looking back. Then one spring afternoon, I noticed a for sale sign outside the biggest house in town, and an impossible idea suddenly crossed my mind. When I first walked through the iron gates, I laughed at myself. The estate had everything I used to dream about as a little girl: towering oak trees, a wraparound porch, tall windows that flooded every room with sunlight, and enough space to host the kind of Christmas dinner I'd always imagined. It felt impossible. Yet somehow, after years of 14-hour workdays, countless setbacks, and more sleepless nights than I could remember, I could finally afford it. A month later, I signed the papers. I didn't buy the biggest house in town to impress anyone. I bought it because, for the first time in my life, I wanted a place where I would never feel forgotten again. Moving day attracted more attention than I expected. The old estate had been a local landmark for decades, so when the sale became public, people were curious about its new owner. Neighbors stopped by with flowers. The local newspaper even published a short article welcoming me to the neighborhood. I smiled politely, unpacked my boxes, and focused on turning the empty house into a home. 3 days later, my phone rang.
Mom.
I stared at her name on the screen. She hadn't called me in nearly 4 years. I let it ring until it stopped. Then came Dad. Then Ethan. Then Lily. By sunset, I had 23 missed calls and more text messages than I'd received from them in the previous decade. "Claire, we heard the exciting news. We're so proud of you." "Sweetheart, we've missed you so much." We should all have Christmas together this year. Reading those messages felt strangely familiar. Not because they sounded loving, because they sounded convenient. They hadn't suddenly remembered my birthday. They hadn't wondered how I'd survived those lonely holidays. They hadn't asked whether I was happy. They'd only reached out after discovering I owned something everyone in town was talking about. I placed the phone face down and walked onto the back porch. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. For the first time, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. The calls continued for days. When I didn't answer, they began leaving cheerful voice messages, pretending nothing had ever happened. A week later, my security camera alerted me to movement at the front gate. I opened the live feed. There they were, my parents, Ethan, Lily, standing together with wrapped gifts and forced smiles, as though no Christmas had ever passed without me. I took a slow breath and walked toward the front door. Just before I reached the handle, my doorbell camera chimed again. The mail carrier had slipped a faded envelope through the mailbox. The return date made my heart skip. It had been mailed almost 8 years earlier. I picked up the faded envelope with trembling hands. The postmark was nearly 8 years old. Somehow, it had been misrouted, returned, and lost before finally finding its way to me. My name was written in my own handwriting. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a Christmas card I barely remembered writing. Mom and Dad, I know you're busy, but I'd really love to spend Christmas together this year. I don't need presents. I just miss all of you. Love, Claire. That was all. No anger. No blame. Just the simple hope of a daughter who wanted to belong. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I felt sorry for the woman who had written those words. She believed that if she loved a little harder and gave a little more, one day she'd finally be enough. She never realized she had always been enough. The problem was never her. A knock at the gate pulled me back to the present. I folded the card carefully, slipped it into my pocket, and walked outside. My parents smiled as if they expected me to throw my arms around them. Instead, I stopped a few feet away. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We made mistakes, she whispered. We thought there would always be another Christmas to make things right. Dad lowered his head. We never imagined we'd lose you. I nodded quietly. I didn't disappear, I said. I stopped chasing people who kept leaving me behind. No one spoke. Lily wiped away a tear. Ethan looked down at the wrapped gifts in his hands. Finally, Mom asked, "Can you forgive us?" I took a slow breath before answering. I already have. Their faces brightened. But forgiveness isn't the same as going back to the way things were. The smiles faded gently. I truly hope you find peace, I continued. But I've spent years building a life where I'm valued, respected, and loved. I can't abandon that just because you're finally ready to notice me. No one argued. For the first time, they listened. I wished them a Merry Christmas, turned around, and walked back through the gate. That evening, every chair around my dining table was filled. Some guests were neighbors. Others were friends. A retired teacher came with her grandson. A widower from down the street brought homemade cookies. 2 college students who couldn't afford to travel home joined us after accepting my invitation. The house echoed with laughter, stories, and genuine warmth. As I looked around the room, I finally understood something that had taken me decades to learn. The biggest house in town wasn't my greatest achievement. Creating a home where no one ever felt forgotten was.